How can you make a class immutable in Java? Here is the correct interview answer. An immutable class is a class whose state cannot change after it is created. To make a class immutable in Java, the class must be declared final, so it cannot be subclassed. All fields must be private and final. No setters should be provided. And if the class has mutable objects as fields, defensive copies must be created, both while assigning them in the constructor and while returning them from getter methods. This prevents any external modification of the internal state. That is the full interview-ready answer. Now let's understand this deeply with a working example so you can demonstrate immutability clearly. We create a class named person. We want the person object to hold a name and an address object. The address class itself is mutable because it contains a field that can change. So to make person immutable, we must take extra care with the address field. Inside the person class, we declare the class final. This prevents anyone from subclassing it and adding methods that change the state. Next, we make all fields private and final so they can be assigned only once inside the constructor. There are no setter methods because setters would allow modification of the object after it is created. In the constructor, when we receive an address object, we do not assign it directly. Instead, we create a new address object and copy the values from the argument. This is called a defensive copy. It ensures that the original address passed into the constructor cannot be used later to change the person's state. Next, in the getter method for address, we again return a defensive copy instead of returning the internal address field directly. Returning the internal field would allow callers to modify the internal address object, breaking immutability. So we return a new address object every time. This combination of rules creates a truly immutable class. Now let's run a small demonstration so you can show immutability in action. We start by creating an address object with the city value set to Mumbai. We then create an immutable person object by passing this address to the person constructor. Inside the constructor, the person class stores a defensive copy of the address, not the original one. Now we modify the original address object and change its city to Pune. If the person class were mutable, changing the original address would also change the person's internal city value because both would be referencing the same address object. But since the person constructor created a defensive copy, the modification to the original address object does not affect the person object at all. Next, we try to break immutability through the getter. We call person.getAddress, which returns a defensive copy. We then change the city on this returned address object to Delhi. If the class were mutable, changing the object returned by the getter would affect the person object's data. But because person returns a brand new address object every time, the internal state remains unchanged. Now we print the internal city value stored in the person object. If we run the program, the output is Mumbai. This confirms that the person object is truly immutable. Neither modifying the original address object nor modifying the object returned from the getter changes the internal state.